How does an immortal being deal with death? Welcome to the Immortal Gifts Podcast, where Dave Robison, Veronica Giguerre, and J Daniel Sawyer read my novel, Immortal Gifts, to you. I'm Catherine Filliard, and I wrote this. This episode of the Immortal Gifts Podcast is sponsored by me. If you like the podcast, tell your friends. If you've run out of friends to tell, buy the book. It's available in ebook, paperback, hardcover, large print, and audio. I also have a Patreon and a Ko-fi, if that's your thing. Impatient? The audiobook is available at my shop and my Patreon and will be headed to all the places audiobooks are sold. And with that, on to the show.
Metamorphosis. Abraham, Atlantic Highlands, New Jersey, January 14th, 2019. The 2 a.m. alarm went off on my cell phone. I put my book, On Wings of Song, a biography of Felix Mendelssohn, down on the nightstand. I stood and walked over to the nest box of 2-week-old kittens on the guest room dresser, with the heating pad cord peeking out from under an old faded towel. I lifted the towel and peered inside. 3 kittens, 2 black and 1 brown tabby. They were in a sleepy, peeping heap. I replaced the towel. Destiny works with a rescue organization named Fur Kids, and sometimes brings home bottle babies. Fur Kids had resources for kittens of adoption age or older adoptable cats, but it's hard to find someone to care for neonates. They'd all go back to the rescue once they were adoptable age, which was both happy and sad at the same time. I wondered if Destiny had taken them home and assigned me the task of feeding them to help me cope with Victoria. It helped a little. It had been 12 days since Victoria died, not that I was counting. I padded down the hall in my bare feet and pajama bottoms to the kitchen in the dark, trying not to clatter or creak on the wooden floorboards and thereby wake up my wife, and poured kitten formula into a coffee mug from a vet conference and put it in the microwave for 10 seconds. I tested the formula temperature on my wrist. I generate little body heat, but I've done this enough times that I can tell whether the formula is too hot. I tiptoed back to the kitten nursery, guest room, but we should really call it what it was, and picked up one of the black kittens. I lifted the tail and peered underneath. It was the male. The other black kitten was female. It's almost impossible for most people to tell at that age, but I've had cats for almost 200 years, and most of that was before the era of spay-neuter, so I've had a lot of practice. I weighed the kitten on a digital kitchen scale and wrote the weight in the black spiral-bound notebook Destiny had provided. I carried the kitten back to the blue armchair next to the window. There was a towel draped over the foot of the bed, blue, contrasting with the white and pink floral bedspread. I put the towel on my lap, then placed the kitten on top of the towel. I picked up a needleless syringe from the side table, drew some formula into it, and slowly, so slowly, allowed the formula to dribble out into the kitten's mouth. It's important to be careful with kittens that young. It's easy to choke them. Fortunately, I had heightened senses. I could feel the kitten's heartbeat, smell the scent of vulnerable young animal and milk. I knew exactly the amount of pressure to apply to the syringe. I repeated the weighing and feeding procedure with the kitten's sisters. They didn't have names yet. I found it easier to wait until either names suggested themselves to me or they passed an age where I felt confident that they would survive. I put the towel on the bed and padded silently to the kitchen. I stored the rest of the formula back in the refrigerator and returned to the guest room. As I passed the master bedroom, Destiny snorted and rolled over. I wondered what she was dreaming about. I didn't have to look to know that her long red braid would be flung across the bed. Victoria had the cutest black-on-black stripes as a kitten. She grew out of them and would trot up to any vet or vet tech and charm them completely. On one occasion, I heard an entire exam room full of loud squeals and cooing, followed by a tech coming out and asking me, "Do you just love on this kitten all the time?" Well, of course I did. Isn't that what cats are for? I tucked my hair behind my ear, sat back down on the brown armchair, and picked up my book. Sometimes I wished I could cut my hair. It had been this length since I was 19 years old, but I couldn't alter my body. My hair and fingernails didn't grow. They didn't break off from normal wear and tear either. I once tried to give myself a trim, and the hair slid right out of the scissors, and eventually the screw holding the blades together broke. No, I just have to keep what Destiny called my romantic poet hair. It was absolutely not romantic poet hair. I was familiar with men's hairstyles of the period, and this was not that. Instead, I had plain shoulder-length brown hair that I sometimes wore in what modern people called a ponytail, and what the Prussian army called a soldier's queue. I was so grateful when the 1960s came around and made it socially acceptable for men to wear their hair long again. There had been an unfortunate incident in which I drank some would-be queer bashers. One can't be leaving evidence like that around. It's bad for anonymity. I'd started wearing a wig whenever I left the house. Government IDs aside, I was thin and androgynous. I could pass for anything between a young adult man and a tomboyish teenage girl based on clothing and attitude, but I only really used the girl thing as a disguise if I was desperate. I read until the 5 a.m. alarm went off and repeated the kitten feeding. I finished my book and checked the time. 6:30 a.m. I walked to the kitchen and cooked breakfast for one. Eggs and toast with coffee with cream and 2 teaspoons of sugar. I'd replaced the icebox with a modern stainless steel refrigerator for Destiny. I turned a tidy profit on it by selling it to my antiques dealer. But I was pleasantly relieved that she didn't mind my not replacing the 1920s blue gas stove. The model I learned to cook on was similar. Destiny's rice cooker, the vegetable steamer, and the microwave suited her needs. She didn't really cook. I enjoyed cooking more than she did, and I also didn't work and barely slept, so why not? The kitchen faced north, thank goodness, so I didn't worry about stray sunbeams, and the entire first floor had a wraparound porch, so sunbeams were rare even on the east and west sides downstairs. I could see the Jersey Shore, the city, and the lower New York harbor from the second floor, so it seemed a shame to block off such a view with blackout curtains, not that it was always safe. I was very aware of the way the sun moved through the house. Destiny shuffled blearily into the kitchen wearing a blue bathrobe and bunny slippers, and grabbed a cup of coffee. "You're an angel," she slurped noisily, sniffed a little, and grabbed the plate of food. Adorable. I washed the pan and could hear the sounds of eating behind me. "Sit with me, silly," she said. So I did. We sat in companionable silence at the small square kitchen table with the white lace tablecloth for a while, and then she said, "How are the babies?" "Gaining weight," I said. "You should check on them before you leave for work." "Good, I will," she said, and took another sip of coffee. "I'm such an addict." I smirked at her and took that as a compliment to my coffee-making skills. Victoria wouldn't be offended for me to note that even without her, there were good things in life, and Destiny was one of them. Outside, a bird chirped. "They're supposed to deliver Victoria's ashes to the clinic today." I closed my eyes, turned my head away, and pressed my lips together hard. My chest was heavy. Destiny reached across the table and took my hand in her warmer one. "In the faith I was raised in, it's left as an exercise for the individual to decide whether you believe Victoria has gone to a better place or is going to be reborn on this earth, or whether she just returned to some overarching soul pool. Whatever you find most comforting, I suppose." I glanced over at Destiny. Her green eyes were full of tears. For Victoria, For me? For both of us? Either way, I appreciated it. I tried to smile and failed. Just as long as no one sends me any more of those accursed Rainbow Bridge cards. If you're not familiar with the Rainbow Bridge, it's all the rage in pet death circles nowadays. People send you cards about how your pet is now young and healthy and happy again and waiting in a sunny field outside heaven for you, and when you die, you'll both go to heaven together. It sounds sweet. But what about the homeless pets? What about my pets? Destiny blinked. I kind of find those comforting. I tried to smile again and failed again. You can. It's just that I don't want Victoria to wait for me. It'll be a very long wait. Destiny sniffled, but she smiled. You're very kind. I shrugged and looked away. Victoria deserved the better place now, not after waiting for an accident to befall me. What happens after death in the belief system you were raised in? You go to remedial life lessons. They take about a year, depending on how much you have to learn. Then you move on to the better place. Victoria was already a perfect soul, in my opinion, and deserved to be in the better place now. I like that, Destiny said. Would you mind if I adopted that? Not at all, I said. We held hands for a moment. I reached across the white lace tablecloth and took her other hand. She was soft and warm and here, and it made me feel better. I wondered whether I should ask her to take the day off from work. Ivan chose that moment to come in and meow for his breakfast. How are you handling things? I asked Ivan. Ivan didn't answer, of course, so I stood up and opened some fancy feast for him. The good stuff? Destiny asked. We fed them some of Destiny's holistic kitty health food, but whenever their appetites flagged, it was fancy feast time. They've had a rough week. Neither of them were eating well without Victoria. They missed her too. Inanna rushed into the room to take Ivan's dish. She must have heard the can, so I rolled my eyes and opened a second can for Ivan. So much tortitude, Destiny said. She cocked her head at me and said, I imagine you want your breakfast too? I smiled. I won't say no. Destiny extended her wrist across the table, so I sat back down, took her arm in both my hands, and bent over to bite. I heard the sharp intake of breath. Ugh. No one tasted as good as Destiny. Vegetarian diet, clean living? I didn't know, but with the steak-like iron taste, Destiny had almost a floral note, like jasmine. I'd miss it if I turned her, but I was willing to make that sacrifice if it meant she wouldn't die. I only took a little. I didn't want to make her sick or weak or anemic. She used her vegetarianism as an excuse to be tested for anemia regularly, and my saliva had vein-closing and healing properties. Or so Flora told me. Is that enough? Destiny asked. She pressed a paper napkin to her wrist hard. I'm expecting a delivery today, I said. Okay, she said, and stood up. I'll check the babies before I go. She paused at the doorway. I'll bring your girl home tonight. You'll bring home a little tin, but she won't be in there. Not really. Thank you. The thing about Victoria that made her Victoria wasn't her leftover calcium. It was the sweet, clever expression in her bright, attentive golden eyes, her sense of humor, her compassion, the way she would stand between me and the front door and meow plaintively to ask me to not take Ivan to the vet. But that's all I would have. Her leftover calcium in a little tin with flowers painted on it. That and memories. I'm still not convinced that she was a cat and not some kind of fae, Destiny said. It was an inside joke that Victoria was a fairy or pixie or some similar creature masquerading as a cat for her own mysterious purposes. Destiny sniffled. Smartest cat I ever met. and I swear she understood English fluently. She moved her chair closer to mine, sat in it, and put her arm around me. "Are you all right?" I didn't answer. I don't enjoy lying to my wife, and I wasn't all right. Destiny squeezed my hand. "I'm so sorry. I'll see you tonight."
Destiny, Atlantic Highlands, New Jersey, January 14th, 2019. When confronted with death, what you really need is life. The answer to death is babies. I stood next to the box of bottled babies and picked up Abraham's black notebook. I read his notes in his meticulous hand. Sometimes his handwriting resembled a Victorian lettering guide, but sometimes, when taking notes for himself, he did it in Yiddish cursive letters. He hadn't done that because he knew I'd be reading his notes. I approved of the kitten's weight gain, but I picked up each individual kitten, one by one, and examined them. Their little white baby fangs, their little blue eyes, their unfurling little ears. I gently palpated their soft, round little bellies while they peeped in protest. They all smelled like milk, though perhaps that was partly because Abraham had wiped them clean and tossed the tissues in a wastebasket. They were looking like normal, healthy kittens, although kittens at their age sometimes fail to thrive, as we vets say. I hoped that wouldn't happen here. I'd brought them home to distract poor Abraham, not to rub salt in the wound. I knew how much it hurt. Victoria was my cat, too, and I saw people going through the same thing all the time at work. I replaced the stained, faded towel over the top of the cardboard box. Kittens that age can't regulate their body temperatures and need a heat source. I left the guest room, carefully closing the door behind me. I didn't think Ivan or Inanna would bother the kittens, but they were too little to vaccinate. I walked down the hall and heard running water in the kitchen. Abraham was doing the dishes. I kissed him on the cheek and turned and walked out the door. I missed Victoria, too. I supposed Queen Titania needed to go back to the Fey realm to check on her subjects. I'd keep an eye out in 6 weeks or so for her return. Okay. Victoria probably wasn't Queen Titania, but she seemed like something more than a cat. Like one of the fair folk pretending to be a cat for her own mysterious purposes. If Victoria was indeed one of the good neighbors, would she come back to my darling husband?
Abraham, Atlantic Highlands, New Jersey, January 14, 2019. I stood in the living room that evening, wearing jeans, sneakers, and a plain black t-shirt. I was warming myself in front of the fire when Destiny came in and handed me the little tin of Victoria, with flowers painted on it, then hugged me. "I'm so sorry. I hate death." The carved wooden mantel framed the fire, so I stared into it. My grief hurt physically. My chest ached, and I fought back tears. "I know, sweetie, but it's a normal part of life." She hugged me again. I could smell the health food store shampoo she used, lavender, and hear her breathing. She was so warm and soft. She was wearing her vet scrubs with the violet paw print pattern. I pulled back a little. The full-body contact was comforting, but I wanted her to understand, and gazed into her beautiful green eyes. "Not for my kind, it's not." I sat on the sofa, still holding the little tin. We now had one of those ubiquitous sectional sofas in front of a gigantic television, in red, because I don't like sectional sofas, but I do like red. They're comfortable, but I don't think they'll age well, if you know what I mean. I could be wrong. Antiques dealers a century from now might do a brisk trade in sectionals, but some instinct of mine insists they'll be kitsch. Perhaps that's harsh. Sometimes it feels like everything kitsch becomes classic again, unless it's forgotten. Destiny sat next to me, Do you want to do anything with them? She curled her legs up under herself. I don't know, turn them into jewelry, sew them into a little pillow? Ugh, I shuddered. After I'd refused fur clippings and paw prints at the vet, the pet crematory had called to offer them to me. No. Those types of morbid souvenirs were common in the Victorian era, but I've never liked them. They felt disrespectful. Perhaps this was a Jewish thing, as there's a strong emphasis on treating a corpse with respect, as it used to be the vessel for a soul. I suddenly felt very guilty for cremating Victoria and not saying Kaddish for her. I knew that was illogical, but the Talmud tells us that the dead mourn their own bodies for 7 days. We're not allowed to eat or pray in front of a corpse, as the dead can no longer do those things, and that makes it feel like we're taunting them. Of course, Maharsha explains that the soul mourns the body because it learned Torah and did mitzvot with it, and Victoria was a cat. That said, if she still had been here in a form I couldn't see, I could still have offered her some comfort or kind words. Well, she said, still talking about the souvenirs, people do. No, thank you. Yuck. I stared at the tin some more. It was black and shiny and covered with tiny pictures of flowers spaced geometrically and mass-produced. Victoria deserved better. There was a pause before Destiny said, "We could get her a prettier urn if you like." I took a deep breath. Please don't take this the wrong way. I'm not angry with you. But what I want is my fucking cat back. And since I can't have that, I don't know what I want yet. That's okay. You have time to decide. For some reason, that struck me as funny. The kind of funny where you're crying and something sets you off and makes you laugh as well. Yes, I had time. Lots and lots of time. All the time. What I didn't have was Victoria, or Flora, or Samuel, or Miriam, or John and Eliza, or Shayna, or Rebecca, Jacob, Rachel, and Reuben. Or someday, Destiny. I hate death. What I ended up doing with her ashes? As a temporary solution, I placed the tin at the bottom of my coffin and added a pillow to simulate her weight on my feet. It didn't help. Abraham, Atlantic Highlands, New Jersey, January 29, 2019. Morning. The sun shone on the snow outside the window. Icicles hung from the porch roof, sparkling. It was lovely, but I was ready for spring. Not that I would enjoy the light and the color of spring except from behind a pane of glass. I should have preferred the shorter days and longer nights, but winter always felt gloomy to me. All the dead, bare trees and all the plants dead and buried under a layer of snow. I made oatmeal for Destiny. And coffee, of course. I served the oatmeal in the blue stoneware bowl she'd bought at a college arts sale, and the coffee in the mug from the local Ren Fair with little flowers painted on it. She shuffled in wearing her bathrobe and bunny slippers, and smiled when I placed them on the lace tablecloth, next to a vase full of roses. I walked over to the boombox on the kitchen counter and turned on Handel's Israel in Egypt, very low volume. I'd promised my wife food in the ketubah, and I enjoyed making good on that promise. As she sipped her coffee, she said, "I Googled Russian." I shrugged and sat across the table from her, pushing the vase of flowers to the side. I wanted to see her, not the flowers. She took another sip of her coffee. Russian? Not Vrezhnia? It was Vresian when I lived there. Destiny appeared to consider that. She took another deep sip of coffee. Tell me about your children again. Were they from Vresian too? No. Flora and I took in some orphans. She raised her eyebrows at me. It was a long time ago. They're all dead. "I'm sorry," she said, and started on her oatmeal. "But presumably they had children. Why haven't I met their descendants?" "They didn't." She tilted her head at me, but I didn't offer an explanation, and she didn't ask. For which I was grateful. It wasn't a cheerful topic. After a moment she added, "Flora? I told you I've been married before," I said. After a moment of silent eating, I added, "She was indiscreet. Does that mean she told people you were a vampire, or that she cheated on you?" I laughed a little. "She didn't cheat on me." It wasn't funny, though. She decided that the best disguise would be a vampire-obsessed actress who specialized in playing vampires in trashy stage plays. Imagine if Elvira was a vampire. People would laugh at you if you suggested she really was one. "Clever," Destiny said. She looked like she meant it, like she was wondering why I didn't do it myself. "It only takes one lunatic with kerosene and some matches." "Oh," she appeared appropriately appalled. In fact, she was pale, ashen, and her hands trembled. I hadn't intended to upset her. There was an awkward pause, and I was done volunteering information for the day. Sometimes I can still smell the smoke and hear the screams. I listened to the spoon scraping the bowl, the coffee being slurped, but I didn't look up. "Does it ever stop hurting?" I gazed up into Destiny's soft green eyes. They looked like Flora's, I realized. "You get to where you're fine most days, and then it hits you again. Those days just start coming farther and farther apart." After a pause, I added, "Takes longer if you don't engage with it, but some days you just can't. On those days, there's a full bottle of Merlot or beer or similarly unhealthy non-coping, but see above about can't." It hadn't stopped hurting in the 27 days since Victoria died. Not that I was counting. I was taking this poorly, but of course, it was the cumulative effect of losses combined with isolation. Knowing that didn't make it hurt less, though. Destiny squeezed my hand, and I stared at the blue gas stove. But I squeezed her hand back. "I don't want you to die. I've had enough death in my life. Too much." "I'm hardly decrepit," she said, and laughed. "You'd be bored after the first 100 years." "I doubt it," I said, and squeezed her hand again. I took both her hands and stared at them. But I would never tire of Destiny, just like I'd never tired of Flora. I wondered if the Kabbalists were right, if sometimes souls did return to Earth. "You don't enjoy talking about your past." I looked Destiny in the eye. She deserved the truth. "I've been lying for a long time. I don't want to lie to you." "Lying?" "Pretending to not be what I am." There was a comfortable silence with Destiny holding my hands, and then she said, "What was the first lie?" "To study music at the Berlin Academy," I said. I squeezed her hands again and said, "They didn't allow people like me to attend." Her brow furrowed. "Vampires?" "No." Destiny's brow failed to unfurrow, so I specified, "Jews." "Oh!" She blinked and gazed at our hands again and bit her lip. "I'm sorry." "Thank you." I considered the matter and added, "I told you before, there's someone I don't want to find me. That's why I don't perform publicly anymore." "Oh," she said, Are you safe?" I shrugged. "He hasn't found me yet." There was another silence, and she stood up, and I was grateful that she didn't press the subject. "I'll check the babies on my way out." She paused in the doorway. "You can't hide forever, you know. I could try.
Ludwig, Rosenheim, Bavaria, October 13th, 1762. When I woke, I was lying on the floor and Father Thomas was gazing down at me. "Are you all right, my child?" I sat up and crab-walked backwards away from him. "You hurt me." My blonde hair flopped over my face and I shoved it back and glared at him. I wasn't certain what he'd done to me, but it wasn't spiritual. He'd enjoyed it in a way that felt vulgar. Father Thomas appeared wounded. "My dearest boy, I would never do such a thing. I should have warned you that hallucinations were common during the initiation." I opened my mouth to protest. I had not hallucinated. "Satan doesn't want you to join us, you see. He must have been very upset. I hope the visions weren't too disturbing." This was rubbish. I frowned and reached up to touch my savage neck. It felt smooth and unblemished. I lifted the shoulder of my vestments to peer at the unbruised skin underneath. I blinked a few times, then examined myself visually and found blood near my clavicle where it might have fallen during the attack. I gazed up at him, awaiting an explanation. "Your nose bled during the initiation. Not to worry, I cleaned you up." He sat next to me and daubed at my vestments with the clean side of a bloody rag. "But—" "Don't worry, you're all right. You have some different dietary needs now, but I'll see to those." "Different, but—" "Don't worry, child. Just go back to your room and get some rest. Tomorrow is a special day. Someone important is coming. Someone I'd like you to meet." "But—" "You're very fortunate. The initiation has given you eternal life. You will never age or die." I wasn't certain how I felt about that. It would become an issue if, God forbid, something happened to my elder brother, Friedrich. "What? I didn't agree to—" Thomas went on at length about my good fortune. Soothed by his words, I went upstairs and lay down on my cot.
Destiny, Atlantic Highlands, New Jersey, February 1st, 2019. I had the dream again, but this time I was wearing massive, heavy, old-fashioned skirts and was trying to escape a burning house with children. I couldn't see the details of the house, just flames everywhere and crying children. I woke with a start. Inanna gazed up at me, concern on her sweet face, so I kissed her on her soft, furry head and padded off to the kitchen to make some hot cocoa, hoping the warm milk would put me back to sleep. Abraham was reading a book and didn't appear to have noticed that I was awake. I eyed the stove warily. It was possible that I'd played too much Sims, wherein it's common to set your house on fire cooking. I could make hot cocoa in the microwave, but the stuff from the stove turned out better. I took a deep breath, squared my shoulders, pulled out a pan, and filled it with milk, cocoa, vanilla, sugar. I placed it on the burner and cautiously turned the dial. A giant gout of blue flame shot out and licked up the side of the pan.
"Trouble sleeping?"
I jumped and dropped the spoon on the floor. He came over and wrapped his arms around me.
Hey.
I put my head on his shoulder and tried to relax.
Bad dream. It happens.
After a moment, I admitted with some embarrassment.
I've always had a phobia about house fires.
Oh. He squeezed me closer, petted my hair, kissed my cheek.
"Sorry,"
I mumbled.
"Don't be,"
he said.
"Would you like me to finish the cocoa?"
I nodded, and he pulled out the chair for me to sit at the kitchen table. I watched him pick up the spoon and drop it into the sink, then get a new one to stir with and add the cocoa, and finally he poured it into a mug. He put some marshmallows and a stick of cinnamon in it and brought it to me. He sat across the table. We sat in companionable silence while I drank the cocoa. He said,
"Would you like me to sit with you while you sleep?"
I nodded, and he got up and grabbed his book, then led me down the hall to the master bedroom. One of the few ways Abraham isn't perfect is that he doesn't sleep in my bed. I've always found sharing a bed comforting. But he sat on the bed with his back against the headboard, and I climbed in and curled up in a ball with my pillow, and that was enough for me to sleep.
Abraham, Atlantic Highlands, New Jersey, February 17, 2019. I was sitting on the red sectional sofa in front of the big screen television, watching the movie version of Interview with the Vampire. I couldn't help it. Two of my weaknesses are classical music and vampire media. When Inanna hissed at Ivan and backed away. That was unusual. She was tolerant in a bored sort of way, or on rare occasions growling and swaggering. "Ivan?" Ivan stared up at me. His eyes were worried and his nose was twitching, but he walked away as there was crashing and shouting on the television. I assumed Ivan's odd behavior was a reaction to the interpersonal conflict. He started meeping, little abbreviated meows. I turned off the television and walked over to where he was, next to the fireplace. He was lying on his side and only his upper body was moving. Inanna was staring at him with a horrified expression, hissed again and backed away. He tried to stand up and ended up dragging his lower body behind him before flopping down again. Not Ivan. Not now. Not Ivan. Ivan? Ivan! Destiny called from somewhere down the hall. "Abraham?" "Ivan collapsed." I rushed over and scooped him up. "Let me see." She arrived in a towel with her hair wrapped in a second towel. We rushed Ivan over to the kitchen table, and I laid him on the lace tablecloth. Destiny looked at his eyes, his breathing, touched his feet. "Okay," Destiny said, but her voice wasn't okay. It was grim. "I think he's thrown a blood clot, and it's blocking all blood flow to his lower body. It's called a saddle thrombus." "Are you sure?" My chest ached and my voice was high, almost hysterical. It couldn't be. I wouldn't accept it. Ivan was lying on the table, nose twitching. He reached out a paw toward me and I gave him my hand and petted him with the other. Destiny tilted her head. Then she rushed out of the room and came back with a needle and some glucose testing strips. "I was going to teach Marcia how to do this at home. I hope she doesn't mind if they're used." I had no idea who Marcia was, nor did I care. Ivan remained bravely silent, but his nose continued to twitch and his eyes were anxious and pleading. Destiny pricked his ear. He flinched, but tolerated it. She tested the droplet with the strip and the glucose meter and wrote the number on her hand with a pen she spotted on top of the microwave. She pricked one of his paw pads on his hind foot and squeezed, then tested that drop of blood. She compared the number on the meter to the number she'd written on her hand. "I'm sure." Blood from Ivan's ear dripped onto the tablecloth. "Look, not only is his blood sugar radically different on opposite sides of his body, but his foot isn't bleeding." She picked up a cotton ball and pressed it to his ear. "How do we fix it?" Destiny sighed. "I'm going to be straight with you, Abraham. He has about a 33% chance of surviving. He may or may not regain the use of his legs. If he survives, he probably has 6 months before it happens again. Right now there are toxins building up on the other side of the clot, and if it loosens up, they'll flood his body and might kill him. The clot might break loose and lodge in his heart, or his lungs, or his brain. We can test to see if he's also in active heart failure, which is common. That'll be blood work and imaging at the clinic, but either way, it's not good." She examined Ivan again. "He's not struggling to breathe, at least. But this is a very painful condition, like a permanent muscle cramp." I said nothing. I knew what she was going to suggest, and the answer was no. I knew he wanted to try. Or was I projecting? "We need to put him down. He's not complaining because he's incredibly brave, but he's suffering." "I'll take the 33%, I said. "I'd pay any amount of money." "You need to think about what's right for Ivan," Destiny said. She took in a sharp breath, sniffled, and wiped under her eyes with the back of her arm. I leaned over and kissed him on the head. "Abraham," her voice was a gentle rebuke, but also compassionate. "At the very least, he needs pain medication, but we need to let him go, Abraham." She reached out a hand to stroke his head. Victoria almost certainly threw a clot too. Victoria. I could see in my mind's eye another little black tin with flowers painted on it, another series of Rainbow Bridge cards. It was 1 month, 2 weeks since Victoria died, and yes, I was fucking counting. Too soon. No, I can't do this again. Destiny made a sympathetic face and left the room. I glanced away for a moment at the black and white checkered floor tiles. I looked Ivan in the eye. Do you want me to try something radical? Ivan didn't answer, of course, but from his body language, his twitching nose, his pleading eyes, he wanted me to fix it. Trust me, I said, and kissed Ivan on the head, and bit him on the back of the neck near the scruff. He peeped in surprise, and Destiny gasped. She'd returned with a cat carrier and wet hair, wearing her robe. Ivan's blood was revolting. He wasn't actively lumpy or anything like that, but I could taste disease. I couldn't tell you how I could define the taste of disease, but I knew. It was almost tinny, is the best description I can come up with. I swallowed and grabbed one of the kitten feeding syringes from the kitchen drawer where we kept spares. Abraham? I'm trying something radical, I said, and bit my wrist. I suctioned my blood into the feeding syringe and squirted it into Ivan's mouth. I didn't know that it would work, and never would have tried it on a healthy cat. Ivan clearly didn't have anything to lose. Ivan drank. There was a moment where I wondered if anything would happen, and then Ivan convulsed. I braced his back against my arm and used my other hand to soothe him. It's all right. Ivan yowled, and his hind legs jerked. I supposed that the change was breaking down that clot. I gave him some more of my blood. Destiny gasped again, and there was the clatter of the cat carrier falling on the floor, but I couldn't spare her my attention at the moment. It took about half an hour, and then his bite wounds and blood test needle pricks closed up, and his fur became sleek and glossy. He opened his eyes and gazed up at me with the same adoring look he'd given me when I opened his infected eyes as a baby. He sat up and glanced around the kitchen, then stood. Destiny had backed all the way up against the farthest kitchen counter and was holding her hands over her mouth, her eyes wide. Her wet hair hung loose. What did you do? It's okay, I told her. I know what he needs. I had some chicken livers in the bottom drawer of the refrigerator, where Destiny never put her food. My emergency stash. I grabbed my blender, not Destiny's new blender, the one I'd purchased in 1972 and barely used, and dumped the livers in. I plugged it in and pressed pulse. There was a grinding sound and an explosion of red in the blender. It smelled delicious. Destiny made a sound of disgust. She was still backed up against the kitchen counter, watching with wide eyes, but now she was clinging to the counter with both hands. I grabbed Ivan's food dish and placed it on the table, pouring the raw, bloody liquid into it. He lapped it up enthusiastically. He spilled a little, but it was hardly the first bit of blood on the tablecloth tonight. It was ruined. Destiny walked over slowly and touched Ivan's tail, his hind feet. They're warmer, but they're still cold. Ivan flicked his tail at her and kept lapping up his treat. He'll only be warm after he feeds, like me, I said. We watched him finish his meal. Destiny tapped the edge of the table. Ivan? Ivan walked over to her like nothing had happened. He sniffed her and gazed up at her, expectant, until she petted him. It's a miracle. Or, at the very least, scientifically improbable to the point of... Abraham? My eyes filled with tears, blurring the vision of my newly healthy, newly immortal golden cat. Abraham? Victoria deserved a miracle too. I should have thought of that.
Destiny, Atlantic Highlands, New Jersey, February 17th, 2019. Okay, shit just got real. Intellectually, I knew Abraham was a vampire. I'd even seen him drink blood out of the fridge and let him drink from my wrist. I wore long sleeves to hide the bite marks. Well, usually it was just light bruising. I'd never seen him make another vampire, nor had I thought this was something that he could do to a pet. I mean, there was a movie called Dracula's Daughter, but there wasn't a movie called Dracula's Dog or Dracula's Cat. I think they'd go with the alliteration. Banicula? Should I worry? I ran myself a bath with a lavender bath bomb in the clawfoot Victorian tub with the white tile everywhere. I got in with a nice cup of green tea. It was warm, smelled wonderful, and I love the grassy taste of green tea. Clawfoot tubs don't have a convenient place to set down mugs, so I put it on top of the closed toilet lid, which was kind of gross when I thought about it, but I had more important things on my mind. For a moment, I missed the bathtub at my old apartment, which had space for a mini altar. I'd decorated it with seashells, rose quartz, and a little statue of Aphrodite. I suspected a nice Jewish boy wouldn't want to bathe with Aphrodite. Once I was in the tub, it was calm and quiet, with only the occasional bath-related splash or drip from the tap. On the one hand, Abraham had cured saddle thrombus, a painful condition that left cats maimed or dead, the vet's worst nightmare condition. On the other hand, what was Ivan now? Was this Pet Cemetery or The Monkey's Paw? How did I end up in a horror movie? I'd married a vampire, that's how. I was even doing the horror movie bathtub scene, I realized, and smiled. I didn't quite have a laugh in me. Abraham wasn't a demon, nor a shambling undead monster. As near as I could tell, he was the person he'd always been, only without the ability to eat normal food or go out in the sunlight. Abraham had human reason, however. Ivan, as adorable as he was a cat. Abraham couldn't explain to the cat what he'd done to him. Was this fair? And what would happen if a bus hit me tomorrow? Should I run? I thought of those vast, deep, soulful brown eyes. I had to believe that he'd done what was best for Ivan.
Abraham, Atlantic Highlands, New Jersey, February 24th, 2019. We were curled up together on the red sectional sofa. Very well. I admitted to myself that it was more comfortable than my beloved horsehair love seat, or even a chaise lounge. I stretched out my legs under a blanket and leaned my head against Destiny's. Sweet Ivan had been clingy ever since the change and watched conversations closely, and also television. It was almost as if he understood English fluently now. He was sitting on my lap facing the television and purring. Inanna had threatened the sofa delivery people, much to my amusement. I'd had to lock her in the bathroom while she growled at me, sounding like a Doberman. She was still angry that I'd allowed the intrusion and sat on the other side of the room giving me the occasional dirty look. Sadly, our bottle baby kittens were now 6 weeks old and almost prime adoption age. I was preemptively devastated. They were wrestling and pouncing on each other while Ivan was determined to wash them. Perhaps Destiny would bring home more bottle babies at some point. Destiny had named them Aurel, Alice, and Cordelia after Bujold's Vorkosigan saga. Destiny was flipping channels again. Why could moderns not select a channel and watch it? Attention spans really weren't what they used to be. She settled on, alas, the news again. There was some Academy Awards speculation, and then Internet personality and independent presidential candidate Thomas Hopkins was thrown off the crowdfunding platform IndieCause today for violating their terms of service. The balding head with a fringe of frizzy hair and serene face of the man I knew simply as Thomas were back on my screen. "This is outrageous," he said. "The terms of use are simply that one may not impersonate others, use copyrighted material without permission, or be vulgar, offensive, or inappropriate. My fundraising is none of those things. It's simply that IndieCause doesn't care about free speech." They showed a solemn-faced black man in a suit, Deshaun Roberts, the president of IndieCause. "The terms of service say that it's up to the platform to decide what is vulgar, offensive, or inappropriate. IndieCause finds Mr. Hopkins' material offensive and inappropriate and chooses not to host him any longer. I have no further comment." I had further comments, but most of them were profane. "Can we change the channel?" Destiny gave me a concerned sidelong look, eyebrows drawn together, lips pursed, and changed the channel to a rerun of I Love Lucy. Abraham, Atlantic Highlands, New Jersey, February 25th, 2019. I sat in my wood-paneled study and did some research on the internet. I'd purchased a new PC when my wife moved in. She had a MacBook Pro, and I'd replaced an aging Dell with a newer model after she gave me a quick speech about computer security and out-of-date software. This was fair. The older Dell ran Windows Vista, and the new one, Windows 10. Lucy, Destiny's tech, was dating an IT guy. I hadn't discarded the elderly machine. I intended to find a different purpose for my faithful friend. My kind can be sentimental about familiar objects and outmoded technology. Computers were a new skill for me, but a person needed something to do when stuck indoors all day, after all. I made a mental note to research best use for an old computer after I finished my current search. My study was a small, warm, brown space with a desk, a desktop computer, and a guitar and piano. Despite being a Mac person, Destiny would often use my PC for quick tasks rather than pull her laptop out of its case. My Stradivarius traveled from room to room with me in case I had a sudden urge to play it, which I often did. I'd had my Stradivarius for over 120, 30 years, and it was a priceless instrument that I should have kept locked in a vault. Well, not priceless. Similar violins sold at auction for $20 million. Each Stradivarius is unique, and not even modern science can figure out how to create a new violin like it. That said, locking a musical instrument in a vault felt wrong. Musical instruments want to be played. I researched Thomas. The usual suspects: Google, Wikipedia, news sites. It wasn't like him to be a political candidate. He preferred to act in the shadows, sending others to do his dirty work. Then again, it was unlikely that an independent candidate would win. Thomas Hopkins was called things like the most dangerous man in the U.S. His church, the Foundation for a Safe America, was at the top of the Southern Poverty Law Center's list of booming hate groups and received regular scrutiny from the Anti-Defamation League. His church had lost its nonprofit status for endorsing political candidates. Good. A string of prisons had fired him for his views, and he was currently making his living running the church, as an internet personality, and as a political candidate. I had what modern Americans call dirt on Thomas Hopkins. Unfortunately, I didn't think I could share it without sharing dirt on myself. No, outing Thomas wasn't my job. Besides, would his followers even care? I'd spent all night on my research. Destiny wandered over in her bathrobe and peered over my shoulder. "Why are you torturing yourself reading about that loser? Who cares what he thinks?" "I know him." I glanced up into her surprised eyes. "He's a vampire, and I don't want him to find me."
Ludwig, Rosenheim, Bavaria, October 14th, 1762. I woke up ravenous and desperately thirsty. The only food in my room was a dry crust of bread on a plate next to my ink and quills and scraps of calligraphy practice. I devoured the bread and promptly had to rush to a chamber pot to vomit it back up. Was I ill? I certainly needed more guidance on those dietary requirements Father Thomas had mentioned. I did successfully swallow a cup of water, but it didn't satisfy my thirst. How odd. There was a knock at my door. One of the younger boys told me that Father Thomas wanted to see me, so I followed him downstairs. There was a disturbance in Father Thomas's office. I went in and glanced around. A tall, thin, pale, sandy-haired priest was staring angrily at Father Thomas. "Imposter! Boy, did you know this man was an imposter?" "What?" "He's not Father Carl from Bern." I was confused. Of course he wasn't Father Carl, he was Father Thomas. "You must be mistaken," Father Thomas said, serene as always. "This has been my flock for years." "I'm not mistaken. The Vatican sent me here to check on Carl, who hasn't reported back since being stationed here 2.5 years ago." "How do you know I'm not Father Carl?" "Carl and I attended seminary together," the priest said through gritted teeth. "Are you even a priest?" "They betrayed me," Thomas thundered. "In 1505 they defrocked me solely because I refused to obey a political order to release a prominent Jew in exchange for money. I, who had discovered entire covens of witches, who had found nearly 100 Jews who had claimed to convert only to practice their filthy ways in secret. And when I refused, when I defended my important work, they dared to excommunicate me. They dared, and you dare to question me." I was horrified. Torture was no longer considered enlightened, although it had not been abolished. And he was an impostor? All our sacraments for the last 2.5 years? Had our dead all died unshriven? Were our babies all unbaptized? Were our weddings invalid? All our confessions? Had he truly said 1505? The sandy-haired priest stared at Thomas, open-mouthed. "You're mad." Father Thomas tilted his head at the priest for a moment, then lunged and bit him. He shoved him up against the wall just like, I was certain of it, he'd done with me. "What are you doing?" I squeaked. "You can't. He's a priest." "And you're not." Thomas glanced at me, holding the priest against the wall with one hand pressed across his mouth. "So, dear boy, about your new dietary requirements." I made an impatient sound in my throat. This was not the time to discuss that. "Please, Father, don't hurt him." Thomas smiled at me. "I won't hurt him." I breathed out a sigh of relief. "You will." He smiled again with a malicious smile. "Feel your teeth." I poked my teeth with my tongue. They felt oddly sharp. I tilted my head in confusion. "You're a vampire." What? Vampires were supposed to be oversexed undead things that killed indiscriminately. I stared at my hands. They appeared normal, if pale. I felt my face, and it felt like my own. I didn't feel dead or undead, nor did I feel lewd or violent. What had he done to me? I hadn't agreed to this. "Bite him," Thomas ordered. I crossed my arms and backed away. "He's a priest." "And you promised to obey me," Thomas said. "I also promised to defend the Catholic faith. I will not harm a priest." I backed all the way to the opposite side of the room. Thomas rolled his eyes and muttered under his breath and made a gesture at me. Thumb and fifth finger extended out, others curled like claws, almost like he was controlling a marionette, then beckoned. Suddenly I felt more like the shambling undead of legend. As if asleep, I walked over. I stood next to him, frozen, trapped in a nightmare. "Bite him," Thomas ordered. My body obeyed the order, but tears sprang from my eyes. I bit the priest's neck, and blood poured into my mouth. To my horror, I found it delicious. "Swallow," Thomas said, sounding exasperated. I drank, and I drank, and I kept drinking until the poor priest fainted, and still I drank, following his body down to the floor. I drank until there was nothing left to drink. Finally, Thomas released me. I curled up in the fetal position on the floor next to the body of the priest, put both hands over my mouth and moaned. "I'm going to hell." I cried for the poor slain priest. "Now that you've murdered a priest," Thomas said, his tone dark and malicious, "I think you need to ask your parents for some money so we can move to another city." I stopped crying, shocked out of my grief by anger, and sat up to glare at him. Had he done this to me merely to gain access to my family's money? I hadn't killed the priest. He had used me as a weapon. "You made me do it. Perhaps I will get money from my parents, but I'll leave without you." "I admit," he said, sounding grudgingly impressed, "you have more spine than I initially credited you with." Then he explained I knew nothing of vampire life and still needed him, and that he'd only done it for my own good, so I would fully understand my new nature and its darker side. I was still angry, but he did somehow convince me to take him with me when I left. Not that I remember how he did that.
You've been listening to the Immortal Gifts Podcast, and I'm your host and author, Catherine Villiard. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss what happened next, and please rate the podcast to help other people find it. See you next time, and remember, becoming a vampire is a thing that can just happen to you, but being a monster is a choice.